So the first universal spiritual principle is this: truth is truth. Truth remains the truth whether anyone knows it or understands it, or if anyone agrees with it. Truth is truth. So when we talk about the universal spiritual principles, the beautiful thing about these principles is they do not require our cooperation or our permission in order to operate. We can't add to them and we can't take away from them. Their strength and their power is intrinsic, for they are established by God Himself. Even in the natural order of things, God has established laws that don't require us to know anything about them, or to understand them, or to agree with them in order to function. For example, the law of gravity. It brings objects down to the ground. Now, it doesn't matter if you know about gravity, or if you understand gravity, or if you agree with gravity. In fact, you can disbelieve in gravity and exert all your willpower against gravity. Nevertheless, we are held firmly in place by this invisible force. Now, something more powerful than gravity is at work. When the Bible says, "He must increase, but I must decrease," this is not just an aspiration or a kind of wish or a hope. It doesn't say He might increase and I might decrease. The presence of the word "must" gives us certainty, finality. These are spiritual principles, spiritual laws, or spiritual truth that cannot be altered. It must be so, therefore it is so. So the first universal spiritual we find in John 3:30 is He must increase. And if Jesus must increase, then He will increase, and He is increasing. You don't have to understand it right now. You might not even agree with it, but the process is at work in every man, in every woman, every boy, and every girl. This process is at work in creation itself. It is a process which Jesus is increasing. It must be so, therefore it is so. No one and nothing can change it, interrupt it, or stop it. So the first universal spiritual principle is He must increase, but there is another spiritual principle here as well. So the next lesson we will see and discuss the second universal spiritual principle. Second universal spiritual principle. Now, if you read that verse again, He must increase, but I must decrease, from John 3:30, you probably guess what the second universal spiritual principle is. I must decrease. And that decreasing is just as important as and just as sure as the increasing of Jesus. Just as Jesus must increase, and in the same way, we must decrease. One half of the equation we have is the law of increase, which states that He must increase, and on the other hand of this law is we have this law of decrease, which says that I must decrease. The law of increase tells everything God has done, is doing, and will do for the purpose of increasing Jesus. The law of decrease tells us that everything we have been through, everything we are going through, and everything we will go through is for the purpose of decreasing self. These two laws, the law of increase and the law of decrease, creates a kind of a tension and a balance. People of other religion and philosophies have tried to glimpse this balance, and they have attempted to explain in terms of male, female, yin-yang, light and darkness. They have observed something that is true, but they are powerless to explain exactly what it is or why it is. they can't really explain it or understand it because they cannot explain it apart from the revelation of Jesus Christ. Behind this process of increasing and decreasing is not an impersonal force, but it's a living person or personality. The law of increase says he must increase. We call it a positive law because it adds something. The law of decrease says I must decrease, and we call this a negative law because it takes away something from us. These two laws are working in harmony together. As Jesus is increased, I am decreased. As I am decreased, Jesus is increased. So now to explain how this law works together, I've taken this glass. This glass signifies our life. As we've lived, we know that we've sinned, we accumulate so much of self in us, and that self is represented by this water. At some point in time, we accepted Christ, or we knew about Christ, and that represents this empty space that we have in this glass. Now, if this is self, this is the I, and this is Christ, he must increase, and so he will. But I must decrease, so I must. As I am decreased, Christ is increased. As Christ is increased, I am decreased. Gives me an opportunity to just have a sip of water too. So as you see, as I have decreased, Christ has increased in my life. And so everything God is doing, and everything God has done, and everything God will do, is to bring decrease to self, so that Christ can increase. As Christ increased, I am decreased. So using John 3:30 as a reference point, we now want to apply these spiritual principles to the idea that God has a purpose and a will. So in our next lesson, we will begin discussing the indisputable facts of God's purpose.